Welcome to part 9 of scaling the AI. For the last, 2 weeks, we've been working on the trash mob. I think the last video we put out, we had done the nameplate over top of characters, allowed us to configure whether or not they had a health bar, a name, etc. So we've been picking up from that point and working through adding the code for the trash mob. And so in this video, we're going to cover a couple of those capabilities. So the key features at this point, we've got an update to the interact system that was fixing the bug and some visual artifacts that we didn't like. So the interact system, as of this release, should be functioning fully. As a reminder, the description includes a link to the game feature plugin, which should include all the code and the blueprints necessary to get the system up and running in your project. We spent the rest of our time working on the health system. So we've added the Lyra health component, the ability system, the health attributes, and linked those all together. We built out a early aggro system, which basically allows NPCs to build aggro and switch targets when someone is doing more damage or generating more aggro on a mob than someone else. That's partially complete at this point. We've added out of combat healing. So if the trash mob stops taking damage, it will start to heal itself back up to 100%. Obviously, we've enabled the taking of the damage so that we can actually damage our mob, and then its death and respawn cycle. So let's jump into the editor and we'll see it in action, and then we'll come back and look through the basic aspects of the code. Okay, so here we are in our test map, and we have our trash mob here that's going to be basically navigating along this path back and forth. We have an interact here that allows us to go interact with our storage mechanism, and this is just simply another actor that's just animating. So we have the basic bystander that you can fill your world in that's just doing a static loop. We've got something that you could use as a quest giver or a banking system or purchasing system. And then we've got our trash mob here that's going to be running back and forth. Now, there is one thing I want to point out. Right now, we are experiencing a slight issue in that when we use, let me pull the trash mob up here. When we do this range check, that's creating two spheres, an inner sphere and an outer sphere. What's happening is as soon as this outer sphere overlaps with the target destination, the AI move is stopping. And so what's happening is, because our AI pawn does not have a route that has collision, we have a default scene component. It's doing an outer bounds of the entire actor and using that to determine whether or not it's reached its destination. And so with the spheres set as they are, you get this. So this is the path it should run from this point to this point. What happens because of that sphere is he only moves a little bit because the outer sphere, the red line, is hitting the target. You can see it there, hopefully, in the thing. And then he turns and goes the other way. So we need these outer sphere and inner sphere to target or to enable our aggro. Oops, he just died. But we can't turn that on right now until we figure out how to modify the AI pawn movement to consider just the capsule and not the sphere. So for now, what we're going to do is decrease those down so that they're inside the capsule. And when we do that, you'll see that he is running further as he moves closer to the endpoints of the line. So that small thing we still have to fix if you're trying it on this build, just so you know. Okay, so now let's take some damage. All right, and stop taking damage. And you'll see that the health bar starts to regenerate. And now let's give it some more damage. And the death event occurs. We have a 10-second respawn setup. So he's going to respawn, actually he's going to respawn back over here in his initial position. He has full health, and he's continuing his path. And so that continues. Over here we have our interact, which I'm getting messages that my database server is not up, but nonetheless the interact is showing up when I mouse over the character, and we moved it up to the midsection. Now we could move it even higher. I'm not exactly sure, I think, where I want that interact, but the default behavior from the system was dependent upon the root location for where it would spawn the interact. And so if your root location is like this one down at the bottom, then that widget appears at the bottom. So we added a small modification that will move that up because, oh, that's the wrong one. Because it was putting the interact at its feet, which is where the root location of this actor is. So again, if we press our interact key, our window is going to come up. Our items are not there because our database server is not up and running. But nonetheless, interacting is occurring. Trash mobs occurring. Damage the trash mob. Can't damage the interact. Stop damaging the trash mob. He re-heals. Kill him. And he dies. Does a respawn after 10 seconds. Those settings are done. So our spawner, whether we use the object pooler, etc., what's our spawn radius, etc., player frequency, respawning. So when we do respawning, we're going to respawn. So if we have multiple actors in this spawner, so let's say we have a trash mob of 3, all 3 have to be dead before the respawner starts its countdown. Individuals will start out of combat healing individually. So out of combat, if you had 3 mobs and you move from one to another, it's likely that one of those mobs will start re-healing after 5 seconds. The out of combat effect is simply this gameplay effect, which heals them back up. Our respawn delay, I thought I said 10, it's 9 seconds. And then we perform the reset pawn effect. So in the spawner, you have the respawning controls here. And then in the rules, let's take a look at the rule table here. We got our normal show nameplate, what's the name over top of it, show health bar for those. This is enabling collision for the capsule, which is necessary for us to do damage. This is whether or not we wanted it to interact, and if we want to offset the interact in world position. So if I wanted to change where that interact label occurs, so I moved it up 100 off of the floor, but we can move it higher up onto the chest by changing that value. This is our range checking, which again, we're dealing with the bug that it's introducing in the AI move to. Whether or not we take damage. And one thing you have to do is make sure that if you are taking damage and you want this character to sort of die at the end, you have to give it a death. You have to give it a death event. So this ability death event has to be added so that when the character dies, it actually performs the visualizations, but it also passes through the Lyra code to do some of those activities. So that needs to be happening. We have a controller on it. it's running a behavior tree. This is our behavior tree. It's very basic. It just patrols back and forth. And we're moving. That's pretty much it. We're moving along path A. So those are the configuration settings in the mob. And then, like I said, on the interact, this is our single crafter. We have interact enabled for this one, and I could move it up. Let's move it up 200, which will put it probably too high. That means that when the label pops up, it pops at 200 instead of at 100. Now, this happens to be laying right over top of their nameplate, which is probably not the best place for it, but you get the idea. You can move it around based on changing that offset. You can even offset it to the side if you want by changing its X and Y. All right, so let's go look at the code. So that change to the place where the interact widget required a small change to the Lyra code. It's only 2 lines, but it allows us to move that label around the screen. And so we went ahead and submitted that to Epic as a potential enhancement to the Lyra project through their community page. And so basically what happens is we've inserted this new get interactable widget offset as a virtual function. If you don't override it, it'll return zeros. So the default behavior is the same. And then when the widget is being drawn in world position, by default, it was just doing the root component. This is a new line we added in their code to say, hey, go ahead and once you get the root component, then offset it by this, do a world position offset by this amount. And so that each interactable target can override this function, change where that world position offset returns, either statically like we're doing in our table or even through some code if you want. So that's been submitted into Epic. Hopefully they accept it. Then you'll see in the code, if you download it, where we're setting up the ability system, the health attributes, and the health component, which all 3 kind of work together as a unit. So the ability system will allow our mob to attack us, but it also allows us to do things like perform the death event, do the re-healing, etc. Because we're using the ability system on begin play, we have to initialize the health component. So basically we take our ability system, we pass it to the health component, and it then internally just creates a reference to that. And then on end play, we have to unlink the 2 components. So when we end play, we unlink the ability system and the health component. So there was one other thing that popped up. When you add the Lyra health component and a character dies, it's going to send 2 messages. So it sends the gameplay event death through the ability system to trigger any abilities that might be tagged against the gameplay event death. And it fires off the Lyra elimination message through the message system, the broadcasting message system. When it does this message, that message is picked up by 4 blueprints. And so you'll see them here, Lyra elimination message. So it's listening for that message. The Lyra code has made an assumption that anytime something is eliminated, it would have had a player state. So the bots and your players all have a player state. And in the player state is where the player's name is. And so it's assuming that when you do these things, there will be a player state. So we have to, in our character, which does not have a player state, we're getting error messages that they don't inhibit gameplay, but they are issuing warnings that, the blueprint failed. So the way around that is in all 4 locations, we basically just added a validate. So if you add a validate node off of the target. This is who was killed. Um, if it didn't have a player state, it would just fail off and we're good to go. So that's the elimination feed. We did the exact same thing on the reticle pistol, reticle shotgun, and reticle rifle. Again, upon receiving this message, just simply strip out that error message. All right, on to the Aggro System. This is in the code that's in the description. Basically, we're maintaining a list of actors that have done damage to the trash mob. So if you think of this triangle as the trash mob, we had those two overlapping circles, an inner and an outer. Once a player crosses the inner circle, they'll get added to the aggro list with no aggro. So if I cross into the inner circle and there's been no one else around, I'll be added to this NPC's aggro list. Even though I'm 0, I will be the top aggro at 0. And we want the NPC to come towards us and attack us. However, if another player is attacking and is increasing their aggro, so their aggro might be 10 or 15 or 20 or whatever number it is. If I cross the line, I get added to the aggro list, but I don't displace the top aggro provider. So this aggro provider is maybe 20 or 30 or 40. I cross the line, I get added to the list, but I don't pull aggro off this player until I do more damage and increase my aggro above this player. Or a player removes themselves by passing out of the outer sphere. So the outer sphere component says, hey, when this player leaves this distance from the trash mob, then drop their aggro out of the list. If they were the highest aggro, then it will pick the next highest. So if this person was the highest aggro, this person just entered into the circle, this person was attacking. When this player leaves the outer circle and drops their aggro, the trash mob should turn and attack the next highest aggro player. So you'll see that in the code. This is the basic elements of it. It's in these two structs that are defined in the AI pawn. The on, begin, and end overlap is where we're adding and removing people from the Aggro system. You'll see the check out of combat function, which is being pulled on a timer. On health change, which is where we're adding the aggro. And then on the death events, where we basically clear all our aggro. So if we die, if the trash mob dies, then we clear all of the aggro off the trash mob. All right, one other thing to talk about is the collision and trace channels that are in Lyra. So there's a bit of an interesting thing, and we tried to figure out an alternate way to do this, but there are 3 chase channels that are important. One is the interactable block dynamic. That's the trace channel that has to be on in order for an interact to show up. That's this check mark here. The Lyra pawn capsule and the Lyra pawn mesh have their own trace channels for the weapons. And so you'll see here this Lyra trace weapon capsule that's getting blocked here on the pawn capsule and getting overlapped on the weapon multi. And then you'll see over here that on the Lyra pawn mesh, the channel weapon is blocked, the capsule is ignored, and the multi is overlapped. So in order for you to do damage, your target capsule and mesh have to be using these collision presets, or at least have these checked. In order for it to be an interactable, it needs to be using this preset. So we could create another trace channel that would combine both being an actor that can take damage and have an interact. But rather than do that, we basically just said, okay, based on the way we set it up in the code, there's sort of an order of precedence, and that order of precedence is basically this. If we want to enable collision, then we're going to use the lyre pawn capsule, which means that if I have someone who's up and I can shoot them, they'll take damage, assuming I turn on damage. If I don't want collision, then I got no collision. So this is just a check on the capsule. Then if I enable interactions, I'm going to override the lyre pawn capsule with the interactable block dynamic. The result of this choice and the sequence of doing this first and this second means that even if I check takes damage and I also check interact, we won't take damage because this will have changed it from the lyre pawn capsule to the interactable block dynamic, which means I won't be able to take damage. And then the other element is the skeletal mesh. If we want it to take damage, then we're going to use the lyre pawn mesh. Otherwise, we're going to have no collision on our mesh because it's more performant not to. So that's just a little bit to think about. We may come up with another trace channel that allows both. But at this point, if we wanted to loot a dead body, I think upon death, we would just simply switch it from lyre pawn capsule to interact, allow you to loot the body, and then when the mob respawned, we put it back to the lyre pawn capsule. So I think it's okay. I can't think of a scenario where you want to shoot something and interact with it at the same time. It's usually kill the trash mob, create a body on the ground, allow me to interact with the body, and then let the body despawn. All right, so hopefully you can dig around the code, leave a like or a comment. We'll probably do one more video as we get the sphere collision problem when the AI movement fixed, and that the trash mob then turns and attacks us with some sort of an attack. All right, thanks for watching.